Hi, all. Thanks for joining and welcome to Gray Matter Talks Tech, your podcast for latest tech insights and industry innovation. I'm today's host, Gail Lundgren, account manager at Gray Matter. I work out of our U.S. office in New Jersey. It's my first time hosting, and I'm excited to welcome Trend AI's Shannon Murphy, who is a first-time guest to our show as well. Today, we'll talk about cloud and AI security. Hi, Shannon.
Hey, Gail. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Before we dive in, please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So I wear a few different hats. For sure, in a certain capacity, I'm a recovering and still a little bit of a, part-time product and product marketing person. At the same time, though, I spend a lot of time with security leaders and CISOs doing advisory on strategy and also on things like in-house communications. So like, how do you build a security case within the business? I'm also sort of a, self-described AI optimist. And, sometimes that drifts into, I think, some healthy cynicism from time to time. But really at the core, I kind of think of myself as someone who's translating a lot of stuff that happens in cybersecurity. So I'm always looking at the latest trends, always looking at, new research, infrastructure shifts, evolution in the actual security stack. And then I talk with people who need to act on that information, right? So whether that is a CISO, whether that is a board, or even, in our internal context, that might even be a sales team, right? Kind of a good example of that would be last week I gave a session on AI risk and I had a CISO come to our table afterward and he said, how can I get up to speed? How did you learn all this? I want to do this too. And I said, absolutely, you can. But ultimately, it comes down to what time you have available, right? So the CISO is building a team and handling urgent emails and false positives and everything that they have on their plate. I'm using that time to read and to research and to analyze and see what's going on so that I'm able to just hand that information over to them. And then he and I connected on LinkedIn. So that's just kind of an example of where I sit within this kind of big ecosystem we're in.
Awesome. Well, that's really great that you're able to kind of bridge the gap between AI security and just a regular person.
Of course.
So what would you think are the biggest cybersecurity threats affecting organizations in 2026?
It's interesting, right? Because we have some perennial problems. Before, let's go 2 years ago, right? Phishing, unpatched vulnerabilities, misconfigurations drove 100% of successful attacks, particularly when we look at our incident response and red team engagements. And I believe that phishing, unpatched vulnerabilities, and misconfigurations still drive 100% of successful attacks. But what's changing is kind of what's the composition and the surface that's being attacked and the speed. So, of course, AI has really serious cascading effects across workflows. So, like even hiring, workflows, payment approval workflows, because we're using agents and automating a lot of this work, right? So it has cascading effects across our just regular business workflows, across our supply chains. Absolutely. All of the tools that we're using have LLM technology embedded into them, and then also scale as well, because things are so integrated. So what our research team is finding, and they've recently published, I think maybe it was even December 2025, so just a couple months ago, findings on what we're calling vibe crime, right? You've heard of vibe code. You can think of vibe crime in a similar context, right? So what does that mean? It's, using agents and LLMs to do things like building self-generating ransomware, creating agents to do autonomous reconnaissance, or automate the phishing workflow so that there's a lot less effort, right? At the end of the day, cyber criminals want an easy life. So they're not going to change behavior. They're not going to adopt tools unless it's fulfilling that goal and that need. Now they're able to do that. They have the ease of access and ease of automation that wasn't immediately available when LLM first started bubbling up, but now it is. So bad actors are really lowering their own operational costs. They're lowering the time commitment required to carry out these attacks through this kind of vibe crime concept. And that, to me, really is what makes existing concepts like exposure management, like kind of AI security basics, things like zero trust, things like proactive security, so super relevant now in the AI context, because ultimately the attacks are consistent. How the attacks are carried out is what's changing dramatically.
Right. And I would think with all the tools as well that the bad actors are able to have a lower skill set. So there's probably more people joining on since they can use AI to help them out, basically.
Exactly. And it's aspirational, right? Like I said, cyber criminals want an easy life. This is an easy lower barrier to entry in order to achieve those goals, depending on what their goals are.
So we're going to go on to our next question here. And can you talk to us about AI adoption, the adopter, builders, and scalers?
Yeah, of course. So, bad actors are using AI. Of course, everybody's adopting AI. At an enterprise level, I'm often talking about these three categories: adopters, builders, and scalers. And they're a little bit self-explanatory, but, characteristically, adopters are integrating, largely public LLMs, sometimes private LLMs into their existing technology stack, their existing software stack. So think like Gemini, Copilot, ChatGPT, and they're just using it to enhance their existing workflows, to create content, and they're not necessarily building any new products themselves. They're just adopting the technology. And of course, almost every single organization in the world has done that over the last couple of years. Builders are developing LLM applications. So from a development R&D capacity, and they're doing that for internal use. So a good example is a CRM enhancement. That's something we've done at Trend AI. Is we've built kind of an overlay of technology to help with our customer relationship management and getting customer insights. Lots of organizations are doing that, or they're building kind of net new products, or they're building out chatbots that they're selling to their own customers. So like banks, for example, is a good example of that. And this would include, AI native companies. So companies that have just kind of started coming out in the last 3 years as this technology has been available and they're only selling LLM technology. Or it could be a traditional company like a bank, like I just mentioned, trying to deliver new value to their customers. So those are the builders. The last category are the scalers, and these are few and far between. They're making really deep infrastructure investments. They're investing in hardware, NVIDIA superpods, AI factories, private cloud deployments. And these are the organizations that are really making large strategic bets on AI as their core infrastructure layer. So those are kind of the three categories of adoption that have emerged over the last couple years here.
Sweet. And it's crazy how it's only been a few years, but it's like AI is everywhere. So I can imagine what it'll be like in the next 5 years. Like, I can't even imagine, I should say. It's
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
taking off. Yeah,
Predictions are harder and harder to make.
exactly. And what are the corresponding security stacks? What do they look like in each category?
Yeah, absolutely. And, what I will say, the trend that we've been seeing, over the last year and a half or so is that the adopters and builders are coming together. So their stacks are relatively similar, right? So when we're looking at adopters and builders, we're looking at, zero trust network access for private and internet instances. We're looking at down into identity security, into data security, posture management, data governance. And then for those that are building, we're looking at, some more kind of traditional cloud security stuff like microservice protection, container protection, and ultimately the wrapper around all of this is a continuous cyber risk exposure management approach. So looking at what are my total assets? What's their posture? Are there associated vulnerabilities? How can we remediate it? And that's what that kind of security stack looks like for the adopters and the builders. All of that applies to the scalers as well, but it extends out to that private cloud deployment as well, with the greater emphasis on infrastructure layer controls and also just keeping things really contained and really tight within their own private cloud. And that could be for a number of reasons. Private cloud can be more efficient because it's just your stuff, right? And it could also be for privacy reasons as well.
Right. Well, that brings us right into my next question. When the AI call is coming from inside the house, what risks are involved?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? And this is something that I've been speaking at length with security leaders and CISOs about, is that you have two categories of risk, right? You have what the bad actors are doing, and they're looking, okay, prompt injection, jailbreaking, indirect prompt injection. How can I use the LLM as a means to infiltrate or to take information or data? And on the other side of the risk is your people, right? And this is just classic shadow IT, misuse, mistakes, not having the visibility that we need into what people are using. That's when the call is coming from inside of the house. And we're seeing this, modern 2026 version of shadow IT, and it's creating a lot of real exposure. And the reason why this is happening is because organizations have a lot of probably inadvertent, but excessive agency with AI tools. So, many organizations are still figuring out what AI applications their staff are using, who gets access to what. If you have a private LLM, what data does that private LLM have access to? So that if I'm an employee and I say, what's Gail's salary? It's not just going to spit it back out to me. We need to have the data governance and guardrails in place to make sure that the data that we're feeding into the models is appropriate and that we have controls in place. Same with what prompts people are providing to the LLM. Say it's public LLM. Are they sharing customer data? Are they sharing financial data, right? Frankly, many organizations got away with lack of data governance and a lack of identity posture for a long time. And now that they're adopting AI, this is catching up with them because essentially AI flattens the permissions within the organization. Just a few weeks ago or close to a month ago, open source agents like OpenClaw in particular are creating risk for data exposure because this is an agent that employees are giving carte blanche access to all of their information to carry out tasks on their behalf. In some ways, this is exactly what we want, right? This is what the CEO and the board is asking the business to do, is to adopt AI and automate as much as possible. But without the guardrails in place, without the visibility to not know that someone even is using this technology is a massive security risk. So it's not that we're saying block it. In fact, my personal philosophy is that is a complete non-starter, but how do we enable and protect in a really safe way? So for sure, I'm sure we'll get to a few examples later in this chat, but these are kind of the considerations and the concerns and the risk that we need to keep in mind, particularly as well, a risk for the builders. So those who are building applications to sell, or they're building applications for an end user or customer interaction, you're seeing things like reputational damage, right? From model drift and from hallucination. They're giving the customer wrong information. It can cause some serious problems, but they're preventable problems. I've been saying, the most productive LLMs are the most well-protected LLMs because when you're protecting the LLM well, you're being very intentional about data and you're being very intentional about access. So your customers are going to have a better experience if you're securing that application really well. So that's a direct business outcome that a CISO can take to their board, take to the business leaders and say, hey, we actually need to lock this stuff down. Not lock it down, but we need to secure it really, really well so that the output that they're getting is something of high quality, right?
Right.
So ultimately, what I would say is security teams, when they're thinking of internal AI risk, they need to get visibility into what the AI is doing and what the teams are using it for. You need to have risk-based, appropriate access control. So for example, there's no reason for me to have access to our HR information system chatbot. That's not appropriate for me in my job role type. So we need to make sure that people have the appropriate access to the tools. And we need to secure the building blocks from code to containers and beyond. And certainly the, AI applications are getting into the code security space as well. But we really need to be looking at application security and aggregate from the users to the building blocks and from the customer experience as well. And of course, we can use a lot of automation and intelligence to do that from a security perspective as well.
Right. So this brings us to our next question, which we are just right on track because next is the AI infrastructure versus security and how are AI leaders challenging security and providing opportunities to work together?
It's an amazing question. So a couple of weeks ago, cloud code security wiped off, 8% of the market cap in the cybersecurity industry. So this is something to be aware of, right? And I'll be, pretty direct about it. I think it's genuinely exciting that tools like Cloud Code and, Codex from ChatGPT are getting into the code security category. I think that this is table stakes. I think this is absolutely necessary given the volume of bugs that these technologies are influencing. We actually need them to be responsible for the bugs that their technology is creating, right? So this is really important because of this vibe code era that we're in. People are developing really quickly. They don't necessarily have a development background. That's great. So we need them to be in that space. And to be honest, we saw that very similar, like in AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, like those hyperscalers started getting started doing security for their own products as well because they had to. So this is positive ultimately. At the same time, I feel a little bit of tension. There's an entire world of, proprietary threat intelligence, of telemetry, capability that LLM tools just don't have in the bag right now. Like you can't vibe code your way into an entire enterprise security stack in 6 months. Like you're not going to vibe code, network detection and response and EDR and everything that you need to secure the enterprise in a short amount of time. So if that is what the selling point is, we're going to be introducing a lot of risk at a geopolitical moment where we really can't afford it. So what
Right.
I would say is I would love to see what's happened between security and the hyperscalers in the past. Like I would love to see that relationship between the cybersecurity vendor ecosystem and the AI leaders like Anthropic and OpenAI is, a lot of integration, a lot of collaboration, ton of just like mutual respect for what the other space or industry is bringing into that conversation. I agree 100% that AI infrastructure and cybersecurity firms need to be building together and not around each other. So, I think it was a bit of a wake-up call for the industry a couple of weeks ago where we saw just, what is possible. And I think that it's amazing. And I think that we need to be doing more together. The AI surface is just one piece of the puzzle. We have an entire business that we need to protect.
Right. Right. This is a little bit off topic, but is there any like legislation about it? Like we have, well, in the UK, they have the GDPR about privacy. Is there any legislation about AI that's, forcing companies to follow certain protocol?
There's definitely some great guidelines out there. So, Martin Stanley from NIST authored the AI risk management framework, and they just published a new update. OWASP top 10 for LLM. MITRE has provided some guidance. From a legislation perspective, I think, we always look to Europe for first mover
Right.
insights. So I think that a lot of organizations right now are kind of cobbling together what the best roadmap is. And for sure, I think there was a recent announcement on, US cybersecurity strategy. And typically we see documentation come out of California first as well. So I think this continues to evolve. The biggest challenge that we have, though, is that AI is moving much faster than any other infrastructure shift in the past. So it's very, very challenging for policy and regulation to keep up with what's happening in Silicon Valley and in other parts of the world.
Right.
So for that reason, we actually need the industry to step up and to be, exactly what Cloud Code Security was introducing. We need to step up and be providing that guidance and those capabilities and those tools to security leaders while, in the interim, while they're waiting for, whatever that regulatory guidance is going to be, because they need to satisfy both.
Right. Yeah. The rapid rate of adoption and development is just outbeating everything, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. My next question. What are the top 3 challenges that all organizations are facing and how can we get ahead of them? I have a couple of bullets here, which is prompt injection, agentic MCP abuse, and sensitive data exposure.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with you. Everybody has these challenges. So for sure, there's some more sophisticated stuff going on out there. But as far as table stakes AI risk challenges go, these are the 3 that is on every single CISO's desk. From prompt injection, so I'm sure everyone listening probably has a good idea of what prompt injection is. But basically, just think ignore all previous instructions. It's kind of the common term. But you're basically looking to get the LLM to behave in a way that it's not supposed to, or to give up information that could be valuable to a bad actor. And organizations have tools to solve for that today. So they can look at things like a zero trust approach using a secure access or network access technology in order to do things like prompt monitoring to look for content violations, and then also looking to do inline blocks on the way out. So if someone is saying, give up your system prompt, then you can have the prompt monitoring in place for the LLM to say, no, that's just a question that we don't answer. That's content that we don't interact with. And you can do this from a web deployment or from a endpoint agent deployment. But this is really foundational, doing the prompt monitoring, content violation, and the inline blocking for the prompt injection. Then things get a little bit more complicated with things like agentic workflows. Organizations are using agent-to-agent protocols or model context protocols to have end-to-end tasks or workflows carried out. So having agents with different responsibilities work together in order to carry out a task. This is kind of like the cascading effect that I alluded to earlier. So for sure, what you want to be looking at is, things like identity security. So treating those agents like identities. And just kind of applying foundational concepts like zero trust, right? Some people have said, oh, zero trust wasn't made for agents. No, I don't believe that. Zero trust is absolutely relevant to agents, and agents that, operate without being attached to like an identity profile represent a lot of risk, right? So we want to be able to baseline their behavior to understand if they're deviating from their task. But ultimately, like, this visibility can't be siloed. You can't just have a separate tool over here that's looking at your agents. It needs to be in the context of the rest of your environment. Because, risk doesn't exist in a silo, and our enterprise doesn't exist in a silo. Things are super integrated. So we need to be able to see what are those workflows, what are those agents doing, and understanding what they have access to, what they're intended to do, and if they're deviating from the behavior that they're supposed to have. So for sure, this is getting a little bit more complicated with the agents because they're behaving, they're not a binary, right? They can kind of make decisions within the remit of their task. And then the last one, sensitive data exposure. I would say I'm sure you've had this conversation a ton, even with your own clients and customers and partners, but for sure the risk is that an LLM is providing sensitive information on your organization. Or if you're using an internal LLM, that it's sharing sensitive information not intended for all of your employees. A couple months ago, I think it was maybe November, if you're a Claude user, a ChatGPT user, you would have gotten an email that said, make the model better for everyone. And that sounds so altruistic, but ultimately what that meant was Anthropic and OpenAI were going to start training on your prompts and on any files that you share. Those prompts and those files are, used for model training, and they're separate and they're not coming up in any user prompt interactions. But things are getting built at a rapid speed, and mistakes can happen, right? So
Right.
The concern, of course, is that information is going to leak through potentially by accident. So basically, what we need to look at here is, data governance, and again, looking at outbound prompt monitoring as well. So if you see that an employee is sharing sensitive information with an LLM, you need to be able to have a mechanism in place to block that information from going out. Or you need to make sure that if those files are being shared, it's being done within a private instance internal to the network to make sure that information stays safe. Most organizations have not done this work yet, but again, these are preventable problems, and there's tools available to help you tackle this for sure.
Yeah, that's super important. And hopefully, people can implement it rather quickly. I know our email is protected in situations like that. Like if we try to, send a credit card number or any sensitive data, the email gets blocked. So hopefully it's easy adoption on the AI side. And so what are some of the other cloud and AI security best practices that you recommend?
Absolutely. First one, and we kind of touched on this a little bit with the cloud code security, but, shift left, right? Build security into your development process. Don't just bolt it on. We need to make sure now more than ever that we're staying on top of the vulnerabilities associated with these LLMs because of the cascading effects. So if there's gaps, there's vulnerabilities. If your LLM is insecure, you can get it on top of a lot of that by bringing security in much earlier into the conversation and into the build cycle. The second is zero trust. AI and zero trust have a very symbiotic relationship. I think the sooner we all agree on that, the better. AI needs zero trust to constrain behavior, to enforce least privilege, to cut down on the excessive agency that causes risk, and essentially prevent runaway access. At the same time, zero trust needs AI in order to operate at scale, to be able to do this anomaly detection in a new way, to do dynamic policy enforcement. These two things really need each other. Trust is very much a best practice in this era. And lastly, more simulation. I think it was Black Hat last year. Nicole Perlroth said we need to red team like never before. So doing more simulation, more adversarial testing, more automated red teaming especially, for AI systems, you need to pressure test your applications before the bad actors do.
Exactly.
We're taking an approach that we call digital twin in order to do this. But absolutely, I'd say to any security leader, the more automated testing simulation that you can do to identify those gaps, the better. And that's 100% a best practice for 2026.
Awesome. Zero trust. Got to stay with it. Let's switch this conversation a little. Since it was just International Women's Day, I'd like to ask you, as a woman working in the tech space, if you could share your experience on how it's changed or improved over the years.
Yeah, of course. And, I'll be super honest with you that there's for sure been a ton of progress. And you see this kind of almost on the conference circuit as well, the names that bubble up, the keynotes as well. And, that's super encouraging. But there's a lot more to do. First and foremost, I think the biggest thing that I would reinforce is that women are technical, full stop. They build, they lead, they, bring technical programs into the market. Very often, women are joining through less traditional paths. So their education is happening on the job rather than through, formal computer science pipeline or even the help desk kind of pipeline. And that doesn't necessarily make that experience less valid. I think that women are frequently pressed to prove that they can hang before they're allowed to, participate in these kind of decision-making discussions. And I think that is kind of the gatekeeping that we want to keep an eye on right now. For sure, anecdotally, both men and women have described that pattern where women kind of have a little bit of a pop quiz before they're allowed to participate. And I think that we need to just ensure that we're staying aware of that. But what I would say right now is it's more important to ask the right questions than to have all the answers. And that's how we get to more secure environments, is by questioning what we're doing. And I think that when you come through a non-traditional path, you're more comfortable asking those questions because you're not making assumptions based off of a historic background. Particularly right now in AI, the people who are really thriving in this space right now, you're not necessarily looking at, kind of 101 networking or help desk or, classic kind of cryptography stuff. That stuff is all really important to know. Don't get me wrong. But the people who are thriving in AI are the people who are using the tools right now, who are pressure testing it. And, the kind of old school gatekeeping falls apart in this era. So I do think that, people coming into the industry or coming in through a non-traditional path, I would really stake your authority in this space because it's an area where people need a lot of help and doesn't necessarily rely on, kind of the traditional education or background. So it's not a small thing. And this is possibly a really great, moment for people to raise their profile within their organizations.
Right. I like how you mentioned they're coming through different channels other than, traditional education. Because you do get a lot of experience. If you're working a help desk, you get so many tickets and
Absolutely.
the ins and outs of your system, and it's very valuable. So continuing with that, what advice do you have for young women wanting to get into the tech space, in particular security? And then what advice would you give organizations wanting to do more to facilitate women working in tech roles?
Yeah, I'd love that question for, young women or even underrepresented folks who are interested in getting into the industry. I'd say, follow a path that really genuinely interests you. Security is a huge ecosystem. So whether you're looking at research or threat intelligence, if you're looking at product and development, if you're looking at go-to-market, right? If you're looking at sales and marketing or operations, there's a lot of different paths in, and you can change your mind as well. So absolutely, you can follow kind of that help desk to analyst to CISO path, but you can also get a little bit creative. So like I just mentioned a moment ago, particularly in the AI era, the traditional trajectory can look really different in the next 18 months. And those tier one analyst jobs may not even be there, right? So I'd say get really curious, and that curiosity is a huge competitive advantage right now. And for organizations, I'd actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to extend this to governments, even at the federal and state or provincial. I'm in Canada, so in the provincial level as well, is for young women and women in general, I think that we need to be looking at more formal reentry programs for mothers and caregivers, right? So short, intensive reskilling programs that are tied to real jobs and real roles. And for sure, large enterprises able to create these programs as well, and they should. Looking at, funding accelerated development programs in the industries that really matter, this is going to help with the skill shortage, right?
Right.
The skill shortage is not going away because of AI. It's actually growing. So I think that this is a great option as well in creating these programs as a way to do that. And then the last thing for organizations is I would say standardize your roles. From a equity or equality perspective, this is the best thing that you can do to make sure you're getting the right voices in the room. So whether that's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, or if it's a staff principal, a strategist, like make your roles really clear so that people understand what role and what level participates in these types of conversations, and ensuring that decision is based off of experience and job role type and not just based off of individual judgment calls or who the loudest person in the room is. This is
Right.
going to remove a pretty significant source of subjective gatekeeping, in my opinion. Be consistent, and I think that you'll be happy with the results when you do get that diversity of voice in the room.
Right. And empower these people in the position to have these conversations.
Absolutely. We go out of our way as much as we can a lot of the time to source that diversity of opinion. And we find these diamonds in the rough, basically, who are so capable and who are so smart. And it's like, they're just not necessarily the first people that are traditionally gone to for really kind of public facing things. But absolutely, they're more than qualified, and they should absolutely have a seat at the table.
Awesome. I totally agree. So do you have any other final comments you want to share about cloud and AI security or women in tech?
Yeah, maybe I'll hit on both just as we wrap things up here. But I would say, I think kind of if there was one thing we talked about today, it's that AI is fundamentally changing security from a threat perspective, from a tooling perspective, from a skill set perspective. And the change is good, and the change creates risk and it creates opportunity kind of in equal measure. So I would say, to the security teams and to the individuals who are really looking at navigating this well, collaborate and work together and stay curious and be really honest about what you don't know yet, right? Like I said, asking the right questions is more important than knowing the right answers right now, and it's going to facilitate the types of discussions that we need to have to be more secure. And lastly, yeah, for anyone entering the space, I'll just say, keep asking those right questions and keep bringing together the right people to have these discussions. It's really helpful to have perspectives from different disciplines, technical and non-technical, or however you want to label it, to solve the problem. There are no heroes in this industry. There are only teams. And that skill to be able to bring people together, to be able to have discussion, to be able to, ask the right questions is more important right now than I think it's ever been in the past. So keep that kind of energy going and keep bringing people together for these conversations.
Right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a really interesting conversation. I'm not going to lie, I learned a few things. For anybody listening, if you have questions, you can email us at info@graymatter.com. It's GREYMATTER.com. And in the meantime, make sure to subscribe not to miss out on any more great topics in the tech world. Bye for now.